Good morning and welcome. My name is Justin Hardman, Director of 21st Century Learning. I'm very excited to be hosting this Monday live stream from Hong Kong, and I'm joined today by Mark Wheatley, who is Assistant Head at Kinabalu International School, or KIS for short. And he is going to be sharing today a presentation entitled From Sabah to the World, Using Local Context to Build Global Citizenship Through Enrichment. So I'm very excited to hear Mark's presentation today and all of the great stuff they're doing at KIS in Kinabalu. So I'll hand it over to you, Mark, and join you at the end for the Q&A.
Fantastic. It's great to be here, and thank you for the warm welcome. And today I'm delighted to be presenting from Sabah to the world. And ultimately, the session is kind of a simple but challenging idea, really, that global citizenship doesn't start globally, but it starts locally, and that global citizenship is also socially constructed. So I want to explore when international schools get this right, how powerful it is, and why it really matters. And so hopefully then I'll draw on my lived practice, particularly from my time working in Mozambique and Sabah. I currently work at Kinabalu International School, but my previous job was at the Aga Khan Academy in Maputo in Mozambique, and I'll use examples from both of these roles to discuss how you can use that local context to build global citizenship. So, a couple of things. Why am I an educator is kind of a really important starting point, I think. My goal as an educator is ultimately that I believe learning and education is one of the strongest vehicles to help produce civic, empowered, and driven generation of change makers, which is quite big picture, but it's what drives me and it's what makes me get up in the morning, and that's why I'm an educator. So how do we create that, and how do we run with that? And at the center of that is global citizenship. Global citizenship is a really important way to create those civic, empowered, and driven generations of change makers. So I feel this is ultimately really important, and given the shifting sands of the global world order currently, this is more important than ever in understanding how do we make change, how do we impact change, and how do we work through it. Bit of a shameless plug here, but I was listening to the Educational Vanguard podcast the other day with the topic of translanguaging, and Ceci Gomez-Galvez was discussing this and talked about all international schools, I think, have global citizenship somewhere in the ethos. If it's in the mission, the vision, the guiding statements, global citizenship is often what drives international schools. And whilst I'm not going to look at translanguaging, that's very much her speciality, I am going to look at ultimately the question is not whether we value global citizenship. The question is, what do we mean by it? And so what do we mean by global citizenship? I'm not really going to get into that because global citizenship will be rooted in the local. And so the definition will be there as well. But you can look at the different definitions. The OECD, the UN have different definitions. And so ultimately, for me, global citizenship is about having young people who act with responsibility, humility, and impact in the world. So the central premise of this is, there you go, global citizenship does not start globally. And the really important context to take away from this is that it starts locally, and global citizenship is socially constructed. With these two underpinning ideas, a lot of the work on global citizenship within your school, through your enrichment program, through your trips, through your extracurricular activities, your CCAs, through your leadership, through your student leadership, can hopefully be underpinned by this notion. It is, if learning is shaped by context, culture, and relationship, then the programs we design ideally must be too. So taking this as like the central thesis of the presentation, it's ultimately really important then that we now split the presentation in two. I'm going to discuss the why. This is the smaller part of the presentation. And then the larger part of the presentation will be the how. So how will give you hopefully some takeaways that then you can take into your practice, into your construction of your programs at your schools, and hopefully be able to understand the importance of this. So We talked about it a little bit, but if learning is contextual, if identity is contextual, then our programs must also be contextual too. And this is a really important underpinning. And we can look at these social constructivist theories, but ultimately our students gain meaning through their local context. And so ultimately, when we're looking for them to engage globally, we want them to first engage locally. So a quick question, and if you are kind of in the chat there, we'll take about a minute or so. If programs are socially constructed, who or what has done the construction in your context? So have a think about that. What is driving your school, and who or what is driving ultimately the context that you're within and the programs that you're delivering? All right, we'll quickly move on. There's the statistic, isn't it, that the average teacher gives something like 1 or 2 seconds of thinking time after a question, isn't it? But we'll move on nonetheless. You can pause me and continue to think about this. But it's important to understand what I call the ghosts of our context. As international educators, we do often move across countries, cultures, and school systems. Bearing that in mind, you have to understand the context that you're working in, and that isn't going to be instant, and that requires you to have a lot of voices in the conversation. So every school comes with its own school history, local history, colonial legacies, caste, social class structures, all of these different things that feed in to the context of your school. And it's why we enjoy being international educators so much. You get to come into this context and become learners ourselves. We get to really understand what it is to be in the place that we're there, what is driving it. Taking that iceberg cultural theory, moving beyond a lot of the surface level stuff and going deeper and looking at some of the more hidden values and things that really shape a country. So when we arrive in a new context, we're guests, and we have to be aware of the ghosts of the context that we have. And so, okay, you want to make a great enrichment program, but let's have a look and let's have a think about it. And if we're making a great enrichment program, we also have to be aware that good intentions don't always equal good outcomes. And so John Hattie, who here is portraited out, looked at this and has talked pretty extensively on this. The most powerful thing we can do is to evaluate what we do and not assume that good intentions equals good outcomes. So looking at kind of global citizenship that way, let's begin to just evaluate maybe some of the areas where it might not reach its outcomes. If we use the critical lens, we can explore the way then that schools are working towards global citizens, but might not be achieving its outcome. And this is a bit of an uncomfortable part. Global citizenship can fail in its outcomes, even when we mean well. And it's important that it doesn't become something that is tokenistic or performative. And so it's important that we move on and avoid kind of the worst case scenarios, which are where international schools feed into this problems of cultural dislocation and brain drain. It's really important then with brain drain that we start to look at enrichment and frame the local before we go into the global. The local has to be framed as something of a success. In your school, success sometimes is framed as leaving. Excellence is validated elsewhere, and local futures become somewhat invisible. I think it's really important that our enrichment programs drive a real understanding that local, then maybe global, and then back to local is absolutely essential for what drives us. 21st century schools are really powerful enablers of global engagement, but the global engagement has to be applied back to the local context for it to be ultimately something that works and achieves the goals that we want of global citizenship. Cultural dislocation on top of this is important. And it's important to understand that 21st century schools are not neutral, transferable, or placeless. And global citizenship is not neutral, transferable, or placeless. Ultimately, there is a strong pull towards making sure the local frames a lot of that global. So looking at the how can we do this in action? I'm going to give you some takeaways, hopefully things you can take. I'm very open to discussing these. This isn't going to be like it's, the absolute, you must do this, but this is a good way for you to begin some of the thoughts and thinking that you may need when looking at your programs, looking at your curriculum, looking at your enrichment, and starting to look beyond. So the first takeaway is it's really important and to build time to discuss and understand your concept and approach to global citizenship. At KIS, this was pretty well established. It's in our mission and vision statement. And it's something where we've built time to discuss this with key stakeholders, and our understanding of global citizenship is framed that way. But it's really important that you get on the same page with this, and that your staff, that your teachers, that your students have a semi-unified approach to what global citizenship is in your local context. Use enrichment as your vehicle. And I feel like this is a bit of a bias because this is where I'm working within, but I feel enrichment can be really powerful when it's utilized this way. Enrichment is where our values come to life. That's our kind of guiding statement here at KIS. But enrichment is where this work comes alive. There are fewer assessment constraints, there's more space for uncertainty, and there's stronger relationships. It's where the values are constructed, not just kind of deployed in a kind of a neutral environment. So enrichment can be really powerful in that sense. And driving your enrichment, hopefully, is the assumption that every kid wants to improve the world around them. As a global citizen, this should be something that we drive for, that every kid ultimately has a desire to improve the world around them. They may not have the language or the confidence yet to express it, but fundamentally, my personal belief is that every human has a desire to improve those around them. So, takeaway 1. I put takeaway 0 because I feel like that's an important first one to put in there. But takeaway 1 is really important to put in there. And I feel this has been really important, particularly when I was a CAS coordinator in my previous job. Zoom. Where are you zooming into? So this is a graphic we're using at the moment in KIS in terms of where are we pinning ourselves to. And often this develops in students as they grow. They begin as younger learners looking at themselves and their impact on others. It grows then into their family, maybe into their class, and then ultimately into their school, and then moving on from there. Students can't change the world yet. And I think that's an important distinction to make. But they can change their school, and they can have a really fundamental mindset that they can change the things around them through driven and civic engagement. And all of this is important to scaffold with your level of Zoom. The Zoom thing really came for me when it was during COVID. And coming out of COVID as the CAS coordinator, a lot of the projects became school-based. So we had to shrink down the Zoom, and we had to look at how do we bring out the mindset that we want without the ideal of going here or going there or doing service or doing volunteer things here. And so ultimately, it was incredibly important that through our enrichment at school, we gained the same mindset. And the mindset is one of an agentic change maker. And that agentic change maker can be made through school. It's a little bit harder, but it's that ideal that they, through their pushing and understanding, can begin to make change in their area around them. Then we kind of expanded outside of COVID into the local. And the local was where we started to place most of our focus. So that mindset really is kind of important here. And it's important on the kind of things that you want to achieve with your level of Zoom. Nurturing empathy and agency and students believing they're capable of shaping change was the key goal. The projects were great, but it was the mindset that was really important. And that meant that it really centered on the level of Zoom. As long as the mindset was consistent, the level of Zoom mattered less. So, as we talked about here, we started local, in my experience in Mozambique, and we asked questions like, what are the problems our community is facing? How is that affected by the global? And all of this was really, really important in driving where the level of Zoom was. And often as the kind of person in charge of a program, defining that for students can help, and it can help narrow down and really help them understand. Second takeaway I would strongly suggest in terms of building global citizenships is to build partnerships. Get into the community and start to partner up and work with different organizations, local NGOs, local organizations that really work with you. At KIS, we're starting to work a little bit with the Rotary Club. We're working with the FA, with an NGO, with local charities that can help provide avenues for our students in terms of their exploration of the local. In Mozambique, a lot of it was done through partnerships with the local schools. You can see a photo here of students getting involved in the local community, and we narrowed it down for them to specifically within that educational field, so that a lot of our enrichment and service was focused in that direction. When looking at partnerships, I feel it's really important to say that they need to be reciprocal. You need to make sure that the people who are receiving are equally giving back as well. And this was done in Mozambique through students coming in and doing kind of language sessions, doing football games, but allowing the partnership to be reciprocal and not white knighting into a particular place. It has to be long-term rather than transactional. And maybe your school could look at maybe memorandums of understandings between organizations, between associations, and grounded in respect for that local expertise and voice. And so a key part of this then is assessing the level of bubble that you might have at your school. And this might be something that you might want to have a look at. To what extent are your students aware of the community around them? And sometimes in international schools, the bubble can be particularly strong, or you can have students from different cultures and backgrounds. How can you help them understand that? And I feel it's a really good unifier. Both schools that I've worked at have been incredibly diverse, but the unifier is that we all live in the same place. And as such, we should all be engaged with the community around us. And I feel this is one of the driving factors of global citizenship. And so assessing that level of bubble and working with that bubble can really help you understand it. Once you've kind of done that, then you can start to look at not assuming, but investigating and getting out and assessing risk, looking for needs, looking for surveys, interviews, feedback, and starting to see where the problems are through those avenues, not assuming that you understand it. The goal isn't exactly marketable success stories. It's sustained belief and agency and helping your students through that process. So ultimately, what did I learn through this takeaway? Empathy and agency is the goal. And if you can begin to make your students empathetic and agentic about making change, then you've achieved the goal. On the side of that, you need to build up, obviously, kind of understanding through your extracurricular activities, through your CCAs, and these sorts of things. Trips then fall into this. So takeaway number 3 is that I would say with your trips, value the local over the international. Trips don't need passports to be powerful. When students value where they are, global learning becomes more grounded and they really understand it. And this is really important in terms of finding the places within your community where they can explore these problems. At KIS, our geography curriculum is very much grounded in the local and looking at these local examples. But beyond the curriculum, your trips and the trips that you go on can also be strong ways to do this. One example of this was in Mozambique. We had students on a student exchange and they wanted to understand the culture of Mozambique. And so we arranged the Mozambican Cultural Express. This was a concrete example where we co-designed cultural experiences to help students who were here on exchange for a month really understand their culture beyond the surface level and to understand the kind of relationship that Mozambique has with the kind of colonial history that it's got. And so the students went on a train and they made their way to Shockway. But on the way to the train, basically, we booked out the entire train carriage, and the train carriage had all of our students in, and we arranged with tour guides for people to come in, and there was stories, there was dancing. And as we were going through on the train, they could see particular areas of importance and local history and really understand what was going on. This led to a really strong connection maybe to the Mozambican rural experience as well, and understanding that rurally Mozambique has more of a majority than urban. And so helping students understand that experience, I think, was absolutely essential to that. So ultimately, I think one of the things is, and I've got this graphic here to show us, start locally, build them up globally to understand global issues, but then root them back into the local. So what this looks like is have a strong understanding of local, move onwards and upwards then to look at global issues like waste management, like global warming, and these issues, but bring it back then into the local responsibility. So they can anchor that understanding of global systems with real local issues and local responsibilities. So this cycle will hopefully ground students and give them a strong understanding of how to be a global citizen. We help students trace the local issues into the global systems, and it's where the concepts like SDGs, interdependence, power, justice start to make sense. They make sense through the local because the students experience the global through the local. At KIS, we do this in Sabah, and Sabah is our socially constructed starting point for our students to experience this. KIS as a school has it written into our vision. You can see the vision document there, but one of the vision statements is ultimately that it is our home Sabah that we're going to construct and root all of our students in and give them that starting point to be able to then explore the world through that. All right. And we see Sabah as a backdrop, and sorry, not just a backdrop. It's more of a curriculum. It's how they kind of really look at it and run through it. And so this statement, I feel, is particularly powerful. Our students do not encounter the world neutrally. They encounter it through the local, through Sabah. So understanding Sabah and being able to apply what they're learning globally is ultimately the goal of our enrichment program. This is probably best shown through Impact Week. This is a week we do at KIS where we come off timetable and we really show, take every student to do a project that is a social impact project. This is one from last year on zero hunger. And the idea here is that every student should be empowered to feel they can make change. Ultimately, and probably the biggest takeaway for me, is all of this is underpinned with strong reflection and metacognition. And so at KIS, we're about to introduce the enrichment portfolio, where students can, through their enrichment activities, begin to reflect on their own growth, but also their own self-awareness of the place around them and start to apply some of these larger concepts in there. So I will plug the conference. I'll be there in March. I'm fascinated to kind of see everybody and discuss this and really look at how global citizenship is interpreted in your context and help us understand and build together. And it will be a lot of fun to speak and talk to all of you. And if there are any questions, I'd love to have them.
Thanks so much, Mark. That was really, well thought through, and I really agree with so much of what you're sharing there in terms of engaging with the local community, all right, of where we are in international schools. And I think you've really shared a lot of really good concrete examples from Mozambique and also the school you're at now in Kinabalu. So yeah, thank you very much for sharing and also coming into Hong Kong in March to share as well. First of all,
fantastic. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. If there are any questions out there, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If you're on, some of the platforms that don't have a chat, you can just switch across to YouTube or LinkedIn. But I have a couple of questions. First off, Mark. First of all, I just wanted to say I really like the term. Trips don't need passports to be powerful. I think that's really. Really a nice little turn of phrase there. And I was actually talking with somebody, it was a few months ago, and they were talking about how they were trying to do this sort of thing, right, where they were going to get kids more engaged in the local environment where they are. It was actually a school in Malaysia as well, I believe. And they were saying they were getting a lot of pushback from parents and maybe kids as well, that they want to go and do something more exciting, right? So and basically it's going to be similar kind of experience, but just in another country. But there's this idea that you need to get on a plane somewhere to make it a real trip. So I wonder if you have any advice to leaders in schools that maybe want to try and push this agenda that you're talking about and resist that pushback from the community.
Yeah, I think for us at KIS, we did a lot of work with the parents to kind of bring them in on the importance of this. And we've got it kind of centrally rooted in our vision document that this is something we feel is important and needs to be pushed. But yeah, there is sometimes a default from some parent groups that, the international is more glamorous. A lot of it, I think, is the packaging, the understanding, and helping the parents understand that and get through that and understand how it's connected to the message of your school. It's not easy. It requires a lot of dialogue. It requires a lot of communication, requires a lot of open channels, but ultimately will be powerful if you get them on board. One of the strongest things we have at KIS is our parent association and the contacts that they have in the local community. It's absolutely fantastic. So we're able to draw on that if we need anything. And the amount of contacts we have in the community means that arranging things locally becomes quite easy in that sense. So yeah, it requires communication, it requires open channels and helping people really understand the connection between your mission and your vision and why local matters. It's not about saving money, it's about having our students rooted.
Absolutely. I wonder if you talk a little bit about, and I imagine this comes through some of the mission and vision work as well, that, in international schools, we sometimes think, well, the kids are, a certain percentage of them are international by definition. They're there outside of their home country. And so, you need to work with them to move them along this journey. But it's true for teachers as well, maybe sometimes even more so, right? International teachers who are oftentimes just, somewhere for a couple of years. And, so there's a tendency not necessarily to want to plug into the local context because, it's not, you're not moving there permanently, right? So how do you bring staff along in this journey as well?
I think elevating local voices as well, I think is pretty important with that, and moving the local teachers into that. And ultimately, a lot of it's then cultural work. So teachers coming in, more often than not, you'll find 60, 70, 80% of them will default to what the school culture is. So including things like that, having in your induction kind of a crash course to what the culture is, what's going on, having your school events represent the local culture. In Mozambique, for example, we would always have a couple of days of kind of crash course, taking them around town, showing them what it means to be from here. The assemblies would often open during important assemblies with like a traditional dance performance. And so just making it easier to plug in, because I'm with you. When you travel countries, it can be difficult, particularly when you don't speak the language, to key in. So I think the school has a role to some extent there in bridging that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I agree with the local voices piece as well. I think so often in international schools, the local voices, whether they're even not necessarily teachers, but assistants and admin staff, right? I think they have can be a powerful voice for this in schools as well, if you're intentional about it.
Definitely.
The last question I have is around because you talked about measuring impact, and I just wonder if you could expand a little bit more about that, about how you've measured the impact of these changes in the two schools that you're referencing.
Yeah, so to a large extent, we measure them on kind of mindset. So in Mozambique, a lot of it was done through surveys. So surveys of students in terms of ideas they might have, beliefs they might have in change. And in KIS, a lot of it will be through the enrichment portfolio. So they're kind of engagement metacognitively with the kind of projects that they're creating, and looking for that kind of there and measuring it less on successful altruistic projects and more about, measuring that mindset shift within the students in terms of what they believe they can do and how powerful they feel in terms of creating the change that they want to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Mark. Really appreciate your time this morning and sharing. And once again, very excited to welcome you to Hong Kong in a month and a bit in March. So thanks again.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
All right, cheers.